So I was trying to figure out what to draw for the various examples, and I sort of ended up drawing a really miscellaneous sort of piece of tech. But I think the value, I think the important part is actually what I'm showing right here in the beginning, which is these very simple shapes. You can see that this is two blocks and a cylinder kind of stacked up next to each other. And I'm kind of just doing random stuff. I don't even have anything in mind. I'm just thinking I'm going to draw some really simple stuff and then turn it into tech. So I'm on to the sort of second step, which is just to unify everything into one shape in a very simple way. It's not really complicated at all. And this isn't like the coolest piece of machinery in the world or anything, but again, since it's a beginning lesson, I really just want to make the point and have a simple example. So I slowly start to add things, like I extruded a little cylinder there at the bottom, and I'm kind of trying to figure out what to do from here. I'm thinking about things I can add or how to make it interesting. And I don't want to make it any more complicated, so I start just adding a few details and cutting in some seam lines here. Really simple stuff, again. I've sped the video up about a lot, I think about 400%, for the sake of brevity, and so that you guys don't have to sit here and just watch every single stroke be made. So I sort of have this simple shape plan blocked in, and I'm ready to kind of make a line drawing out of it and bring it together and add some final details, which is not the part I want to emphasize right now. I really kind of, as I'm adding details and I'm turning this simple shape into some kind of like miscellaneous piece of hardware with the line drawing, which is how it ends up here. But that's not really the point. The point is that I started with some very simple shapes, and with enough detail and enough work to kind of bring everything together, some color and whatnot, it can become a machine. All right, so this is just a second example in this lesson of combining simple shapes to end up with more complicated ones. And it's pretty straightforward. I already have it drawn out, so I'm just going to run through it, and hopefully having just another example of how these simple things can come together will just kind of round out the idea for you. So here's my rough sketch. It's obviously, as you can see, it couldn't be any simpler. It's just a big extruded cube. It's like a big long rectangle on top of two cylinders. Not complicated at all. And at the beginning of the concept, this is where my head is, right? This is all I'm thinking. So added on to top of that is the sketch. Now this looks a little more complicated, I know, but bear with me. So I've retained these big shapes underneath everything, but I've added on sort of subsequent details. So here's a better way to look at it. I've got my simple shapes, and then I go one step into making it more complicated. As you can see, all I did is add a little detail here. I kind of divide up the shape a little bit down here. I kind of I adjust the cylinders, and I put a long taper on it down here, and I bring the bottom of this one up. And over here I add a couple little shapes as well. I thought this one long flat line was too boring, so I just brought it up at an angle, made the rectangle taller, and here is just a big cylinder stuck in length, from front to back, I guess is what you can call it. Really simple stuff so far, right? So even here, even though there is more detail and it's more complicated, you can break down each one of these steps in a really simple way. what are we talking about? We're talking about bringing simple shapes together, right? So this is a big rectangle and this is a cylinder. Boom. And to go one step beyond that, here's where, this is kind of the step where I've gotten through my sketch phase, my really, really basic sketch phase, and I'm ready to sort of bring all these pieces together into one. So here's where I do things like I start smoothing out the lines that I have. And just to show you what I mean is, let me hide this. So instead of, on these blue lines, what I have is, the cylinder comes down and then there's the straight line for that rectangle there, right? But in this sketch phase is where I'll do things like I consider that cylinder and this rectangle to be one shape. So what I do is I'll blend this line here and then again on the back edge, so it sort of homogenizes all these shapes. And for me as a designer, I bring them all together just a little bit, and then for another example is I have this curved line, I have this curved line here, but I cut a hole in the front of the shape, in the shape of the cylinder, and then I indented so there's lines going, into the shape. So I've subtracted a little bit there. Very simple, but again, it's all based on that. That indent there is based on the big cylinder I slapped in. So even though this looks more detailed and looks more complicated, the steps I'm taking one by one are fairly straightforward. All right, so with that said, let me hide the sketch underneath this, and here's what I end up with. And this for me is right around where I'm comfortable to start on my final kind of line drawing. That's just my workflow. If you're concepting or even if you're modeling, you can, maybe this is like a block out model and you're ready to start stitching it all together. Or if you're painting, you've sort of roughed in all these shapes and now you're ready to tighten it down and kind of put those final highlights on it. Whatever, it doesn't really matter how you're working. It's more just the mind frame that I'm in, that I'm talking about at this point. So with that said, I have the final right on top of it. This is not a wonderful render or anything. This is not super detailed, but I just wanted to illustrate my point with this example. So let me hide these colors and just show you the line drawing. So here's my sketch pass, and then here's the cleanup on top of it, and pretty straightforward. So I've changed things. It's not the most amazing drawing, but I wanted to illustrate, no pun intended, how these simple shapes coming together later on end up being something slightly more complicated. After you've kind of cut up the shapes a bit, you've added a little detail, you've kind of thought about the design, you've integrated some different shapes here and there if you wanted to, and stuff like that. But again, not the most complicated example, but I think it's good to kind of just see the process one more time. My hope in showing this to you, if you're a beginner, is that you can look at a concept like this and you, instead of getting caught up in, let me pick a nice highlight color, instead of getting caught up in a shape like this, first, or, this first, you're able to see, generally speaking, number one, we have that, number two, we have that, and so on and so forth, on down the line to the final. This is also sort of a simple drawing lesson. I mean, in sketching, this is one of the first things they teach you, is to look at things with, look at the overall shapes of things before you draw them, or look at the larger forms first and then the smaller ones. And that's very much, in essence, a similar lesson, a similar point I'm trying to make. But in the context of designing machinery, I think sometimes it can be it can be very, very useful because sometimes machines are made up of lots of straight lines, lots of big geometric shapes. All right, moving on. All right, I wanted to take a second and kind of pause the lesson and talk about blending shapes together because I think it totally ties into the idea of combining simple shapes to get more complicated ones. So this is the Modo 3D program, if you're not familiar, and it has a cool tool in here that will combine meshes using Boolean operations, and it'll give you options to blend them together. So all I have here is 2 cylinders, which are here and here, right? And they're interdependent of each other. But using this software, I can affect how they're blended when I add them together, which I've already done. So I'm selecting this. They call it a strip, and it's really just the transition between the 2 pieces. But what I wanted to talk about is that you have this option when you're designing and when you're drawing, and especially using this technique, which is to, you don't have to leave the first result when you combine shapes together. You don't have to leave them, one to one, just plain like they are. You can affect the way they come together along their intersections with blending. And I think more official term for it is filleting between or chamfering, but we'll just call it blending for now. So really easy, really simply said, this is no blending, and this is a little blending, and that's a lot of blending. But the point is that now with a lot of blending, or even some blending, it's more, the shape now is a little more sophisticated, and it's more than just one cylinder plus another cylinder. There's some material in between that affects the whole thing. And so I know this sort of seems very simple, but I wanted to just mention it so that if you use this technique in your designing or your drawing, you keep this in mind so that you have the option. You're not limited to only the straightforward result of one shape plus another shape, or 2 shapes plus another 2 shapes, or you get my drift. I just want you to kind of be aware that there's this kind of second step to the process that can allow you to bring 2 shapes together in a way, or more shapes, 2 or more, in a way that makes it more complicated. Okay, I hope that's clear, and if not, holler at me and I'll be happy to talk about it some more, I guess. All right, I wanted to give another example of blending, or chamfering, as they call it in the 3D world. And this is another way to blend shapes. So because I want, if you're a beginner and you're watching these lessons, I want you to be sort of equipped with a handful of tricks. And I also don't want you to be confused if you see me doing something kind of doing a detail or kind of changing a shape a little bit. I want you to sort of know what I'm doing. So I'm back in Modo because it's sort of easy to show you what I mean in 3D. So back to the core of the lesson. Look, I've got 2 simple shapes here, right? But let's say I'm going to connect them right in the middle, right here. So in Modo, this is called bridge. There's tons of ways to do this. Again, this is not about 3D and it's not about modeling. It's just very easy to show you what I mean in this environment. So here I have combined, this simple block with this simple block with kind of a block in the middle. I don't know what you call that. Is that a trapezoid? No, I'm not sure what that is, but it's another, if you imagine that it's another rectangle with its sides going this way, it's just a rectangle, floating in space. Now, another way to blend shapes or to make them different is by, quote unquote chamfering, or again, blending. I want to blend the result I've gotten from combining simple shapes. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to grab these edges and I'm going to bevel it or chamfer it, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. If I put in some steps in here, it blends it on a curve, right? So now I've gone from, two simple blocks here and here, but I've blended the result, the where they combine, and I've come up with something totally different. Now I'll do it again up here, but with a, maybe a different shape, different width, sorry. So I don't know, right around there looks like the same width. But what if I make it more narrow here, right? The blending. Now I have this sort of different shape that, doesn't exactly look like, the point here is that it doesn't exactly look like I had 3 rectangles. It's sort of a bit different from that. But I did start with 2 rectangles really to get this, and I used some simple tricks of blending or chamfering, smoothing, whatever the hell you want to call it, combining. I really don't care. It's more the idea that I'm talking about, that that will let you, it's the idea of this, simple technique that'll let you combine, again, blend your simple shapes to get something more complicated, right? Okay. Hopefully that helps kind of bring the idea home a little more, and we can move on. So the last example is a bit more complicated, but it starts in the exact same way. I wanted to show that even though the final result can be more detailed, more intricate, more involved, that no matter how complex a design might be, that the beginning, the starting stages still depend on big, simple shapes and simple proportions. To be totally honest, I don't start drawings like this anymore. Sometimes I do, in the sense, see, it's easy. We've got 3 cubes and 1 cylinder. There's a little note for myself. But what I was going to say is, God, what was I going to say? I don't start things like this always. Sometimes I do, and I know, for example, I know that I'm going to have a big cylindrical part of a design, so I'll get it in the beginning of the sketch. Usually I have a good idea, because I love drawing machines and tech so much. Usually I have a decent idea where I'm going. So I don't have to start so simply, but what I'm illustrating here is that almost every design and mechanical shape will have simple proportions and simple shapes that make it up at its most basic level. So you can see I moved past the blocks and the cylinders, and I'm trying to bring them together into kind of one fairly cohesive shape. And At this point, I'm not exactly sure what this thing is, but I remember I started thinking that it could be some kind of industrial like reactor or some sort of port for I don't know, some kind of big sci-fi factory. So I started thinking in those terms. Again, I'm moving on to the third rather stage of the sketch, and I'm leaving things simple for myself. I don't want to overcomplicate things, but I'm separating these stages out in this example to illustrate that, once again, I can get to a very complicated shape with a very simple beginning. So even if you want to do something really complicated or really believable, or even if there's some sort of machine or device or an engine or something that you're not sure how to draw or how it's going to look, you can always jump in with a simple start. So I'm slowly adding on this sort of like last level or maybe second to last level of detail in the overall form. I decided, okay, I'll have some sort of cylindrical something sticking out of the front. So I just drew a cylinder in there for proportion and just to like as a note for later. And I added those like scaffolding framing parts on the outside just for fun. But you can see that they're based on just big straight lines going from the high part down to the bottom. And it, again, everything I'm doing can be broken down into very simple moves. I mean, I drew a big circle on the side, and I use that as a base for seams, and I continue those lines there. I thought, it'd be cool if it had little support, feet things coming out. And so I'm starting to get down to the like slightly smaller details. Trying to wing this ellipse in perspective correctly, and I can never get it right, but I tried anyway. So I don't want you to worry about the complexity of this design as you're looking at it. I just want you, it's like, see, I'm kind of pointing out here that, those feet really are just a little block in a cylinder. But what I was going to say is I don't want you thinking, oh, wow, cool, he's got a really neat concept, not that it's anything amazing, but, and it's really detailed and there's all this stuff going on. I don't want you to worry about that. I'm really just trying to illustrate that you don't have to be afraid to try to design or draw something, really intricate. Don't get overwhelmed in the beginning, and don't think that, there's no way I can draw a complicated, machine or a really cool like radar array or something like that. Everything can be broken down into its simpler parts, and that's really just the lesson I'm trying to impart here. I mean, even here down to the details, that's a bunch of seams on a cylinder, and here that's just a little sort of cylinder that's tucked into the bottom of the machine, and here's a cylinder for feet, for that matter. And that's not to say you have to use very, very simple geometric shapes and cylinders and cubes and trapezoids all the time. Not at all. That's not at all what I'm saying. Here's the final line art, by the way, just to show you how far I went. So here are the stages. Very simple to a little more complex. I'm adding shapes. Remember, this all started with cubes and one cylinder, right? So on top of this, I have a lot to work with, so I start adding detail that embellishes, and I kind of feel like it's in the right spot. And we'll talk about that stuff in later lessons, so don't worry. But here's the final line art with some color, and it all started from some blocks and a cylinder. I want you to keep that in mind. Thanks, guys.